The world was holding its breath. News of Pope Francis's sudden resignation had spread like wildfire, leaving both Catholics and non-Catholics alike stunned. It wasn't every day that a pope stepped down, especially one as beloved and influential as Pope Francis. The Vatican, usually a place of solemn rituals and quiet reverence, buzzed with activity as cardinals from all over the globe descended on Rome. They were there for one purpose: to elect a new leader of the Catholic Church. This was no ordinary parsing. It was a decision that would shape not only the future of the Church but also its relationship with billions of people worldwide. In the midst of this whirlwind, Dr. Evelyn Leavitt found herself at the center of attention. A well-known religious historian, Leavitt had spent decades studying the intricacies of the Catholic Church, its history, and its role in modern society. She wasn't just an academic. She was a storyteller who could make even the most complex theological debates accessible to everyday people. Her appearances on television shows and podcasts often drew large audiences, eager to hear her insights into matters of faith, politics, and culture. On this particular evening, Leavitt sat across from veteran journalist Chris Matthews in a CNN studio. The bright lights glared down on her and cameras captured her every expression. Outside the studio, millions of viewers tuned in, hungry for answers about what was happening inside the secretive walls of the Vatican. Matthews opened the segment with his trademark intensity, asking Leavitt to explain the significance of the papal transition. "Dr. Leavitt," he began, leaning forward in his chair, "this is uncharted territory. What does it mean for the Church, and how do you think the cardinals will approach choosing a successor?" Leavitt took a deep breath before responding. She spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully. "This is a pivotal moment," she said, her voice steady but tinged with excitement. "When a pope resigns, it sends a message. That leadership isn't about clinging to power but serving the greater good. The cardinals now face an enormous responsibility. They must choose someone who can guide the Church through turbulent times while staying true to its core values." As she spoke, Leavitt painted a vivid picture of the challenges facing the Catholic Church. There were scandals that had shaken trust in its institutions, divisions between conservative and progressive factions, and growing skepticism among younger generations. Yet, she emphasized, these challenges also presented opportunities. The next pope has a chance to redefine what the Church stands for, she said. Will they double down on tradition, or will they embrace change? That's the question everyone is asking. Matthews nodded thoughtfully, then leaned in again. "So, Dr. Leavitt, if you had to guess, who are we looking at as potential candidates?" His tone was casual, almost playful, but the question carried weight. Leavitt hesitated for a moment, her mind racing. She knew better than to speculate recklessly, but something inside her urged her to take a risk. After all, this was live television. Anything could happen. "Well," she started, pausing briefly to gather her thoughts. "There are the usual suspects, of course. Cardinals from Italy, Brazil, Nigeria, all strong contenders. But I want to talk about someone else. Someone who might not be on everyone's radar yet." She paused again, letting the suspense build. The studio fell silent except for the faint hum of the cameras. Even Matthews seemed intrigued. "Archbishop Robert Prevost," she continued, pronouncing the name with deliberate clarity. "He's based in Peru, though he's originally from Chicago. If you look closely, you'll see why he's such an interesting figure. He's worked extensively with indigenous communities in South America, advocating for their rights and addressing issues like poverty and environmental destruction. He's deeply spiritual but also pragmatic, a rare combination." As Leavitt spoke, her enthusiasm grew. She described Prevost's background, highlighting his humble beginnings and his rise through the ranks of the Church. She noted how he had earned respect not by seeking power but by serving others. "He's not flashy," she admitted. "You won't find him giving grand speeches or courting media attention, but those who know him speak highly of his integrity and vision." Her comments caught Matthews off guard. "Prevost, huh?" he said, raising an eyebrow. That's not a name we've heard much about. Why do you think he's worth mentioning? Leavitt smiled faintly, sensing the gravity of the moment. Because sometimes, she replied, the most impactful leaders are the ones nobody sees coming. And if I were to place my bets, which of course I'm not, I'd say Prevost is the wild card everyone's overlooking. The room felt electric after she finished speaking. Matthews glanced at the teleprompter, then back at Leavitt. Bold prediction, he remarked, a hint of admiration in his voice. We'll have to keep an eye on him, won't we? What neither of them realized at the time was just how prophetic Leavitt's words would turn out to be. Within minutes of the broadcast, social media exploded with reactions. Viewers who had never heard of Archbishop Robert Prevost suddenly wanted to know everything about him. Who was this man? Could he really become the next pope? And why did Leavitt seem so confident in her assessment? For Leavitt herself, the interview marked a turning point. Until now, she had always played it safe, offering measured analyses without venturing too far into speculation. But tonight was different. Something about the situation, the uncertainty, the stakes, the sheer unpredictability of it all, had pushed her to take a leap of faith. Little did she know, her words would set off a chain reaction that would ripple through the halls of the Vatican and beyond. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away in Rome, the cardinals gathered in the Sistine Chapel remained oblivious to the drama unfolding on live TV. For them, the focus was solely on prayer and discernment as they prepared to cast their votes. Yet, unbeknownst to most, whispers of Archbishop Prevost's name had already begun circulating among certain circles. Whether coincidence or fate, Leavitt's mention of him seemed to validate what some had suspected all along, that this relatively unknown figure might hold the key to the Church's future. And so, as the world waited anxiously for white smoke to rise from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel, one thing was clear. Whatever happened next, the story of the new pope and the woman who dared to predict it was only beginning. Archbishop Robert Prevost was not a household name, even within the Catholic Church. To most people, he was just another face in the crowd of clergy members who dedicated their lives to service. But those who truly knew him understood that there was something extraordinary about the man. Born and raised in Chicago, Prevost grew up in a modest neighborhood where life wasn't easy but values were strong. His parents, both factory workers, instilled in him a deep sense of compassion and humility from an early age. They taught him to care for others, especially those less fortunate, and those lessons stayed with him throughout his life. Prevost's journey to the priesthood began almost by accident. As a teenager, he attended Mass regularly, not because he felt particularly religious, but because it gave him a sense of community. Over time, however, he found himself drawn to the teachings of Jesus, particularly the emphasis on love, justice, and serving the marginalized. By the time he graduated high school, he knew he wanted to dedicate his life to helping others through the Church. After completing seminary training, Prevost was ordained as a priest and quickly made a name for himself as someone who genuinely cared about the people he served. His first assignment took him far from the familiar streets of Chicago, to Peru, a country grappling with poverty, inequality, and political instability. It was here that Prevost's true character began to shine. Instead of staying in comfortable parishes or mingling with elites, he chose to live among the poorest communities. He learned Spanish fluently, immersed himself in local customs, and worked tirelessly to improve living conditions. Whether it was building schools, organizing food drives, or advocating for indigenous rights, Prevost became a beacon of hope for many who had long been ignored by society. But what set Prevost apart wasn't just his actions, it was his approach. Unlike some clergy members who imposed rigid doctrines, Prevost listened. He believed that faith should empower people rather than control them. He encouraged dialogue, welcomed diverse perspectives, and never shied away from tackling difficult issues. For example, when mining companies threatened to destroy sacred lands belonging to indigenous tribes, Prevost stood firmly beside them, using his position to amplify their voices. His courage earned him both admiration and enemies, but he remained steadfast in his convictions. Over the years, Prevost's reputation grew. though not in the way one might expect. He didn't seek fame or recognition. In fact, he avoided it whenever possible. Yet word of his work spread, reaching the ears of influential figures within the church hierarchy. Cardinals and bishops began to take notice, not because Prevost sought their approval, but because his methods produced tangible results. Communities flourished under his guidance, and individuals inspired by his leadership went on to make positive changes in their own lives. Despite his growing influence, Prevost remained humble. Friends and colleagues often described him as the quiet force, someone whose strength lay not in loud declarations but in steady, consistent action. He dressed simply, ate sparingly, and lived in modest accommodations, refusing to indulge in luxuries that came with higher ranks in the church. Even when he was appointed Archbishop of Lima, one of the most prestigious positions in South America, Prevost continued to prioritize service over status. He spent more time visiting remote villages than attending lavish events, earning the nickname El Pastor del Pueblo, the people's pastor. Yet, for all his accomplishments, Prevost remained an enigma to the wider world. Outside of Latin America, few people knew much about him. This anonymity suited him fine. He preferred working behind the scenes, letting his actions speak louder than words. However, that was about to change. When Dr. Evelyn Leavitt mentioned his name during her live interview, it sent shockwaves through the global audience. Suddenly, everyone wanted to know, who is Robert Prevost, and why does he matter? As curiosity mounted, journalists and researchers scrambled to piece together information about this mysterious figure. Interviews with former parishioners painted a picture of a man who led with empathy and wisdom. One elderly woman from a rural Peruvian village recalled how Prevost had once walked miles through torrential rain to deliver medicine to her sick grandson. He didn't have to do that, she said, tears welling up in her eyes, but that's who he is. A man who puts others before himself. Others spoke of his diplomatic skills, noting how he could bridge divides between opposing groups. In a region plagued by conflict, Prevost's ability to mediate disputes and foster understanding was nothing short of remarkable. A local politician credited him with preventing violence during a tense standoff between farmers and government officials. When tensions ran high, Archbishop Prevost stepped in, the politician explained. He reminded everyone of our shared humanity. That's a gift few possess. Even critics acknowledged Prevost's unique qualities. Some conservative members of the church questioned his progressive leanings, particularly his support for social justice causes and environmental activism, but even they admitted that his intentions were pure. You may disagree with him, one cardinal remarked privately, but you can't deny his sincerity. As the days passed, the spotlight on Prevost intensified. Social media buzzed with theories and speculations. Was he really a contender for the papacy? Could someone so unassuming rise to such a monumental role? While many dismissed the idea as unlikely, others saw potential. In a church desperate for renewal, Prevost represented a fresh perspective, a chance to reconnect with its roots while embracing the challenges of the modern world. For Prevost himself, the sudden attention was unsettling. He had always valued privacy and disliked being the center of attention. Now, reporters camped outside his residence, hoping to catch a glimpse of him. Emails and messages flooded in from around the globe, some offering praise, others seeking advice. Despite the chaos, Prevost handled it with grace, issuing a brief statement thanking those who supported him while reminding everyone that the focus should remain on God, not individuals. Behind closed doors, however, things were heating up. Within the Vatican, whispers of Prevost's candidacy gained momentum. Some cardinals saw him as the perfect compromise candidate, a unifier who could appeal to both traditionalists and reformers. Others viewed him as a wild card, someone unpredictable enough to shake up the status quo. Either way, his name was now firmly on the table. What made Prevost's rise so fascinating was the contrast between his outward simplicity and the complexity of the role he might soon assume. Here was a man who had spent decades serving quietly in the shadows, content to let his work speak for itself. Yet now the entire world was watching. wondering if this unassuming pastor from Chicago would step into the shoes of St. Peter. As the conclave approached, speculation reached fever pitch. Would Prevost emerge victorious? Or would the weight of expectation prove too great? No one knew for sure. But one thing was certain. Whether or not he became pope, Robert Prevost had already left an indelible mark on the hearts and minds of countless people. And perhaps in the end, that was the greatest legacy anyone could hope for. The interview with Dr. Evelyn Leavitt had already captured the world's attention, but it was about to take an even more dramatic turn. Chris Matthews, sensing that Leavitt was holding something back, leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Dr. Leavitt," he said, his tone shifting from casual curiosity to probing intensity. "You've clearly done your homework. But what makes you think Archbishop Prevost has a real shot at becoming pope? I mean, let's be honest, most people have never even heard of him." Leavitt hesitated for a moment, her fingers brushing against the edge of the desk as if steadying herself. She glanced at the teleprompter, then back at Matthews before finally speaking. Her voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable weight behind her words. "Chris," she began, choosing each syllable carefully, "when you study the history of papal elections, patterns emerge. The cardinals often look for someone who can unite the church during times of division, someone who embodies both tradition and reform. And while names like Cardinal Martino or Archbishop O'Malley might seem obvious choices, they carry baggage, past controversies, entrenched alliances, or reputations that polarize rather than unify." Matthews nodded thoughtfully, urging her to continue. Leavitt took a deep breath, leaning slightly closer to the microphone. "Prevost is different. He's not tied to any major faction within the church. He hasn't been embroiled in scandals or power struggles. In fact, until recently, he's flown so far under the radar that many people don't realize just how influential he's become. But here's the thing. Those who do know him, those who've worked with him, or witnessed his impact firsthand, they speak of him with reverence. They call him a bridge builder, a peacemaker, someone who listens without judgment and acts with purpose." Her explanation was compelling, but Matthews wasn't satisfied yet. "That's all well and good," he countered, "but isn't the papacy about more than just being likable? The next pope will face enormous challenges: climate change, declining church attendance, internal divisions. Does Prevost really have what it takes to tackle these issues on a global scale?" Leavitt smiled faintly as though she'd anticipated this question. "Absolutely," she replied without hesitation. "And here's why. Prevost's entire career has been defined by tackling big, systemic problems, not through grand gestures, but through steady, incremental progress. Remember, this is a man who spent decades working in some of the most impoverished regions of South America. He didn't just preach sermons, he rolled up his sleeves and got to work. He built schools, advocated for indigenous rights, and stood up to powerful corporations threatening local communities. These aren't small accomplishments, they're testaments to his ability to navigate complex situations and bring people together." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "But there's something else too, something I haven't mentioned yet." For the first time since the interview began, Leavitt looked directly into the camera, her expression serious, but tinged with excitement. "Sources close to the conclave have told me that Prevost has quietly garnered significant support among key cardinals. Not because he's campaigned for votes, he wouldn't do that, but because they see him as the answer to the church's prayers. They believe he can heal wounds that have festered for years, whether it's reconciling conservative and liberal factions or addressing the credibility crisis caused by past scandals." The studio fell silent for a beat, the gravity of her statement hanging in the air. Matthews blinked, momentarily caught off guard. "Wait a second," he said, his voice rising slightly. "Are you saying that Prevost is already a front-runner? That he's being seriously considered despite his low profile?" Leavitt didn't flinch. "I'm saying that in Vatican politics, perception is everything. On paper, Prevost might not seem like the obvious choice, but sometimes the least expected candidates are the ones who rise to the top precisely because they represent a clean slate, a departure from the status quo, and right now, the church desperately needs a fresh start." Her comments sent ripples across the globe. As soon as the segment aired, social media erupted with reactions. Hashtags like the Prevost Pope and New Hope for the Church trended within minutes. Viewers debated fervently, dissecting every word Leavitt had said. Some praised her insight, calling her prediction bold and prescient. Others dismissed it as wishful thinking, arguing that the cardinals would never elect someone so unknown. Meanwhile, journalists scrambled to verify her claims, reaching out to sources inside the Vatican for confirmation. But Leavitt wasn't finished yet. Sensing that she had the audience's full attention, she decided to go one step further. "Let me leave you with this," she said, her tone softening but still carrying authority. "If Prevost does become pope, and I'm not saying he will, but if he does, it won't just be about filling a vacancy. It'll be about setting a new direction for the Catholic Church. His vision goes beyond mere survival. It's about transformation. Imagine a pope who prioritizes environmental stewardship, who champions social justice, who empowers women and marginalized groups within the church. Some might call it revolutionary. Others might call it long overdue." Matthews stared at her, visibly impressed. Revolutionary was a strong word, especially when discussing the leader of an institution steeped in centuries of tradition. Yet Leavitt's confidence was infectious. She spoke with such conviction that it was hard not to believe her. "So you're suggesting," Matthews ventured cautiously, "that we could be looking at a pope who changes the game entirely?" "Exactly," Leavitt responded, her eyes gleaming. "The church has always evolved, albeit slowly. Every era produces its own challenges and opportunities. What sets great leaders apart is their willingness to embrace change while staying rooted in core principles. If anyone can strike that balance, it's Prevost." By the time the interview ended, Leavitt's words had ignited a firestorm of speculation. News outlets replayed clips of her remarks, analyzing every nuance. Pundits weighed in, some agreeing with her assessment, others dismissing it as overly optimistic. Even within the Vatican, where secrecy reigned supreme, whispers spread like wildfire. Had Leavitt stumbled upon insider information, or was she merely speculating based on her expertise? No one knew for sure, but one thing was certain. She had succeeded in making Archbishop Robert Prevost a household name. For Prevost himself, the sudden attention was both flattering and overwhelming. Back in Lima, he tried to focus on his duties, visiting parishes and meeting with community leaders as usual. But everywhere he went, people stopped him, asking questions or offering congratulations. Reporters camped outside his residence, hoping to catch a glimpse of the man who might soon lead the Catholic Church. Emails poured in from strangers around the world, sharing stories of how his work had inspired them. Despite the chaos, Prevost remained unfazed, responding with characteristic humility. "Let us pray for guidance," he told reporters gathered outside his office. "The decision belongs to God, not to us." Behind closed doors, however, the situation was anything but calm. Within the walls of the Vatican, tensions simmered as cardinals prepared for the conclave. Some viewed Prevost's rising prominence as a threat, fearing that his progressive ideals might alienate traditionalists. Others saw him as a potential savior, someone who could restore faith in the Church's mission. Debates grew heated, with factions jockeying for influence. Yet, amid the turmoil, one fact became clear. Leavitt's interview had shifted the narrative. Whether intentional or not, she had elevated Prevost from obscurity to contention, forcing the cardinals to take him seriously. As the days passed, anticipation reached a fever pitch. The world waited anxiously for white smoke to rise from the Sistine Chapel chimney, signaling the election of a new pope. Would it be Prevost, the quiet pastor from Chicago? Or would another candidate emerge victorious? No one knew for sure. But thanks to Leavitt's bold prediction, millions of people tuned in, eager to witness history unfold. Looking back, it's impossible to overstate the impact of that single interview. In just a few minutes, Leavitt had transformed Archbishop Robert Prevost from an unknown figure into a symbol of hope and possibility. Whether or not he became pope, his story had already captured the imagination of the world. And perhaps in the end, that was the true power of Leavitt's words. Not, just to predict the future, but to shape it. Less than 48 hours after Dr. Evelyn Leavitt's explosive interview, the world held its collective breath once again. The cardinals had completed their deliberations inside the Sistine Chapel, and now all eyes were fixed on the small chimney perched atop the ancient building. When white smoke finally billowed out, signaling the election of a new pope, an electric hush fell over St. Peter's Square. Thousands of pilgrims, tourists, and journalists gathered below, craning their necks to catch a glimpse of history in the making. For many, the moment was deeply personal, a chance to witness the beginning of a new chapter for the Catholic Church. Cardinal Jean-Louis Thuram stepped onto the balcony overlooking the square, his face calm but solemn as he prepared to deliver the announcement. The crowd quieted instantly, every ear straining to hear the words that would change everything. Annuntio vobis gaudium magnum, he began in Latin, his voice echoing through the vast space. Habemus papam. Cheers erupted like thunder as people clapped, cried, and embraced one another. But the excitement quickly turned to astonishment when Thuram uttered the name that no one expected. Eminentissimum ac reverendissimum Dominum. Dominum Robertum, Sanctae Romanae Ecclesiae Cardinalem Prevost, qui sibi nomen imposuit Robertus Primus, Pope Robert III. The name reverberated across the square and around the globe. It wasn't just the fact that Archbishop Robert Prevost had been elected. It was the choice of his papal name that left everyone stunned. Never before had a pope taken the name Robert. To some, it felt like a bold declaration, a break from centuries of tradition, and a sign that this papacy would chart a new course. Others saw it as symbolic of humility, choosing a simple, unassuming name rather than one steeped in historical significance. Whatever the reason, the decision sent a clear message. Pope Robert was determined to redefine what it meant to lead the Catholic Church. When the newly elected pope appeared on the balcony moments later, the atmosphere shifted yet again. Clad in pristine white robes with a warm smile and piercing gaze, Pope Robert exuded both authority and approachability. He moved slowly, taking in the sea of faces below him, before stepping up to the microphone. His first words were simple but profound. Brothers and sisters, let us give thanks to God for bringing us together at this sacred moment. I am not here to rule over you, but to serve alongside you, as we strive to build a better future for our church and our world. The crowd erupted into applause, but there was something deeper in the air, a sense of hope that hadn't been felt in years. Pope Robert's tone was gentle yet firm, his message rooted in compassion and unity. He spoke of healing divisions within the church, addressing the needs of the poor and marginalized, and confronting global challenges like climate change and inequality. Each sentence seemed carefully chosen, striking a balance between acknowledging the church's struggles and offering a vision for renewal. By the time he concluded with a heartfelt prayer, tears streamed down the faces of countless listeners. For many, it felt like the dawn of a new era. As news of Pope Robert's election spread, reactions poured in from every corner of the planet. World leaders issued statements congratulating him, praising his commitment to social justice and diplomacy. Religious figures from other faiths expressed optimism about working with the new pontiff to promote peace and understanding. Even skeptics who had doubted the church's relevance in modern times admitted that Pope Robert's message resonated with them. Social media lit up with posts celebrating his humble background and progressive ideals. Memes, hashtags, and fan art dedicated to the people's pope flooded platforms like Twitter and Instagram, capturing the public's fascination with this unlikely leader. But perhaps the most telling response came from ordinary Catholics, those who attended Mass, weekly or only occasionally, those who had drifted away from the church, and even those who had never set foot in a cathedral. For them, Pope Robert represented something rare: authenticity. Unlike many high-profile clergy members, he didn't project an aura of superiority or detachment. Instead, he embodied the qualities of a pastor, someone who walked alongside his flock, sharing their joys and sorrows. Stories circulated online of how he had personally visited sick children, mediated conflicts between rival groups, and stood up to powerful interests to protect vulnerable communities. These anecdotes painted a picture of a man who genuinely cared, not because it was his job, but because it was his calling. In the days following his election, Pope Robert wasted no time getting to work. True to his reputation, he eschewed lavish ceremonies and formalities, opting instead for practical action. One of his first acts as Pope was to meet with homeless individuals living near the Vatican, sitting down with them to listen to their stories and share meals. Photographs of these interactions went viral, reinforcing his image as a servant leader. He also announced plans to convene a special council focused on addressing clergy abuse scandals, promising transparency and accountability. "We cannot move forward until we confront the sins of our past," he declared during a press conference. "This is not just my responsibility, it is ours, as a community of believers." Yet despite the widespread enthusiasm surrounding Pope Robert's papacy, not everyone welcomed his rise. Conservative factions within the church bristled at his progressive stances, particularly on issues like women's roles in the clergy and LGBTQ+ inclusion. Critics accused him of undermining traditional values and pandering to secular trends. Some even questioned whether he was truly qualified to lead, given his relatively low profile prior to the conclave. Rumors swirled about resistance brewing, behind closed doors, with whispers of dissent among certain cardinals and bishops. For Pope Robert, navigating these tensions required skill and patience. Rather than alienating his opponents, he sought common ground, emphasizing shared goals over ideological differences. During private meetings with skeptical leaders, he listened attentively, acknowledging their concerns while gently challenging outdated mindsets. Publicly, he framed his reforms as extensions of core Christian principles: love, mercy, and justice. "Change does not mean abandoning our faith," he explained during a homily. "It means living it more fully, adapting to the realities of our time without losing sight of eternal truths." Meanwhile, Dr. Evelyn Leavitt watched events unfold from afar, her prediction having come true in ways she could scarcely have imagined. While she avoided commenting publicly on the outcome, sources close to her revealed that she remained deeply invested in the success of Pope Robert's papacy. Friends described her as quietly proud of her role in elevating his candidacy, though she insisted that the credit belonged to the cardinals and, ultimately, to divine providence. "I simply said what I believed," she told a colleague privately. "The rest was out of my hands." As weeks turned into months, Pope Robert continued to make headlines with bold decisions and heartfelt gestures. He appointed women to senior, advisory roles within the Vatican, a move hailed as groundbreaking by advocates for gender equality. He launched initiatives aimed at combating environmental degradation, partnering with scientists and activists to amplify the Church's voice on climate issues. And perhaps most significantly, he called for a year of reconciliation, urging Catholics worldwide to reflect on their relationships with God, each other, and the broader human family. "Let us be instruments of peace," he urged during a televised address. "In a world torn apart by division, let us choose love." Despite the challenges ahead, Pope Robert's leadership inspired millions to re-engage with their faith, or in some cases, discover it for the first time. Younger generations, in particular, found resonance in his emphasis on social justice and inclusivity. Churches reported increased attendance, especially among teenagers and young adults who appreciated the Pope's willingness to tackle contemporary issues head-on. Online forums buzzed with discussions about how to live out his teachings in everyday life. Even non-Catholics expressed admiration for his moral clarity and compassionate approach. By the end of his first year, Pope Robert had cemented his place as a transformative figure in the history of the Catholic Church. Though debates about his policies persisted, few could deny the positive impact he had made. Under his guidance, the Church began to shed its image as an institution resistant to change, embracing instead a spirit of openness and renewal. And while the road ahead promised to be fraught with obstacles, one thing was certain: Pope Robert, I had already left an indelible mark on the hearts and minds of people around the world. Whether viewed as a visionary, a reformer, or simply a humble servant, He embodied the hope that humanity and the Church could evolve toward greater goodness. As Pope Robert I settled into his role as the leader of the Catholic Church, the world watched with bated breath to see how his promises of reform and renewal would translate into action. True to his word, he wasted no time in implementing sweeping changes that challenged long-standing traditions and sparked both admiration and controversy. His first major initiative came just weeks after his election, when he announced the appointment of 3 women to high-ranking advisory positions within the Vatican, a move that sent shockwaves through the church hierarchy. For centuries, the Vatican had been a male-dominated institution, but Pope Robert was determined to break that mold. The appointments were met with mixed reactions. Progressive Catholics celebrated the decision as a step toward greater inclusivity, while conservative factions voiced their disapproval, arguing that it undermined the Church's teachings. Despite the backlash, Pope Robert stood firm. In a press conference, he addressed the criticism head-on, saying, "The contributions of women are essential to the mission of the Church. To exclude them is not only unjust but also contrary to the gospel message of equality and service." His words resonated with many, especially younger generations who had grown disillusioned with what they perceived as outdated practices. But Pope Robert didn't stop there. One of his boldest moves came when he launched a global initiative to combat climate change, framing environmental stewardship as a moral imperative. He convened a summit of scientists, activists, and religious leaders from various faiths, urging them to collaborate on solutions to protect the planet. "Creation is a gift from God," he declared during the opening ceremony. "To neglect it is to betray our responsibility as caretakers of this earth." The initiative included concrete actions, such as divesting Vatican funds from fossil fuel industries and investing in renewable energy projects. Critics accused him of overstepping the Church's spiritual mandate, but supporters praised his willingness to address pressing global issues. Pope Robert also took decisive steps to address the lingering wounds of clergy abuse scandals which had plagued the Church for decades. He established an independent commission tasked with investigating allegations of misconduct and holding perpetrators accountable, regardless of their rank or influence. Victims' advocates cautiously welcomed the move, though some remained skeptical about whether real justice would be served. Nevertheless, Pope Robert's insistence on transparency marked a significant departure from previous administrations, signaling a new era of accountability. Despite these achievements, resistance to his reforms continued to simmer beneath the surface. Conservative cardinals and bishops grew increasingly vocal in their opposition, viewing his progressive policies as a threat to the Church's identity. Behind closed doors, debates turned heated, with accusations of betrayal and calls for restraint. Some even speculated about potential efforts to undermine Pope Robert's authority. Yet rather than engaging in power struggles, Pope Robert chose to focus on dialogue and reconciliation. He invited critics to private meetings, listening patiently to their concerns while gently challenging their assumptions. "We are all imperfect vessels," he once remarked, "but if we seek understanding, we can find common ground." Amidst the turmoil, questions lingered about how someone as relatively unknown as Archbishop Robert Prevost had managed to secure the papacy. Was it purely coincidence, or had unseen forces played a role in his rise? The answer began to emerge months later, when a leaked document published by an anonymous whistleblower shed light on the inner workings of the conclave. According to the report, Prevost had been part of a secret coalition within the Church, a group of cardinals and influential figures determined to steer the institution away from corruption and toward renewal. The document revealed that members of this coalition had quietly rallied support for Prevost, seeing him as the ideal candidate to bridge divides and implement much-needed reforms. They admired his humility, his diplomatic skills, and his track record of serving marginalized communities. What's more, they believed his low profile made him less susceptible to political maneuvering, allowing him to act independently once elected. The leak caused a stir, prompting speculation about who else might have been involved in the coalition and what other secrets lay hidden within the Vatican's walls. Dr. Evelyn Leavitt found herself at the center of the ensuing storm. As details of the coalition emerged, it became clear that she had known far more than she let on during her live interview. Sources close to the situation confirmed that Leavitt had been approached by members of the coalition months before the conclave, asking her to subtly prepare the public for Prevost's possible rise. While she denied any formal involvement, her role as a catalyst became undeniable. Journalists dubbed her the prophet of Pope Robert, crediting her with helping shape the narrative that ultimately led to his election. For Leavitt, the attention was both flattering and uncomfortable. She had always preferred operating behind the scenes, offering insights without seeking recognition. Now, however, she found herself thrust into the spotlight, with reporters hounding her for interviews and social media users dissecting her every comment. Rather than engage further, she retreated from public life, returning to academia and declining requests for appearances. Friends described her as conflicted, proud of her contribution yet wary of being labeled a puppet master. "I'm just a historian," she told a colleague privately. "If my words helped bring hope to people, then I'm grateful. But the credit belongs to those who did the hard work." Meanwhile, Pope Robert pressed on, undeterred by the controversies swirling around him. His leadership style reflected the same humility and determination that had defined his earlier years in Peru. He lived simply, refusing luxuries that came with the papal office, and continued to prioritize personal interactions over formal ceremonies. Whether visiting prisons, comforting grieving families, or meeting with world leaders, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that inspired trust and respect. Yet, for all his accomplishments, challenges loomed large. Resistance within the Church showed no signs of abating, and external pressures mounted as governments and organizations scrutinized his initiatives. Balancing tradition and innovation proved to be a delicate dance, requiring constant vigilance and adaptability. Even so, Pope Robert remained steadfast in his belief that change was necessary, not for its own sake, but because it aligned with the core values of love, justice, and compassion. As the months passed, stories of Pope Robert's impact spread far beyond the borders of Vatican City. Parishes reported renewed enthusiasm among congregants, particularly young people drawn to his emphasis on social justice and inclusivity. Online forums buzzed with discussions about how to live out his teachings in everyday life. Even non-Catholics expressed admiration for his moral clarity and compassionate approach. For many, Pope Robert represented not just a religious leader, but a symbol of hope in a fractured world. Looking back, it's impossible to overstate the significance of Dr. Evelyn Leavitt's role in shaping the narrative of Pope Robert's rise. Her prediction during the live interview wasn't merely a guess, it was a carefully calculated statement designed to challenge perceptions and open minds. By mentioning Archbishop Prevost's name, she planted a seed that blossomed into reality, transforming an obscure pastor from Chicago into a global figure of inspiration. Whether intentional or not, her words had ignited a movement, proving that sometimes the smallest actions can have the greatest impact. And so, as Pope Robert III continued to lead the Catholic Church through uncharted waters, one thing was certain: his papacy was unlike anything the world had seen before. It was a testament to the power of vision, courage, and humility, and to the enduring belief that even in times of uncertainty, faith can guide us toward a brighter future. By the end of his first year as Pope, Robert III had become a household name, not just among Catholics but across the globe. His reforms, bold speeches, and unwavering commitment to justice and compassion had left an indelible mark on both the Church and society at large. Yet with every step forward he faced new challenges, some from within the Church itself, others from a rapidly changing world that often seemed resistant to spiritual leadership. Despite these hurdles, Pope Robert remained steadfast in his mission, to serve as a bridge between tradition and progress, faith and action. One of the most enduring legacies of Pope Robert's papacy was his ability to inspire hope in places where it felt scarce. From the slums of Lima to war-torn regions in Africa, his messages of peace and reconciliation resonated deeply with those who had long been marginalized or forgotten. He traveled extensively during his early years as Pope, visiting communities ravaged by poverty, conflict, and natural disasters. In each location, he rolled up his sleeves alongside local volunteers, rebuilding homes, planting trees, and comforting the grieving. These acts of service weren't just symbolic, they were deliberate efforts to show that the church wasn't confined to grand cathedrals, but lived in the hearts and hands of ordinary people. His visits also highlighted another hallmark of his leadership: listening. Unlike many of his predecessors, Pope Robert prioritized hearing directly from the people he served. During town hall-style gatherings, he invited individuals to share their struggles, fears, and dreams. Whether speaking with indigenous leaders in the Amazon rainforest or young climate activists in Europe, he listened intently, asking thoughtful questions and offering words of encouragement. This approach earned him widespread respect, even from critics who disagreed with his policies. "He doesn't just preach," one journalist wrote after observing him interact with a group of refugees. "He listens, and somehow that makes all the difference." However, not everyone welcomed Pope Robert's vision for the future. Conservative factions within the church continued to push back against his reforms, viewing them as too radical or inconsistent with doctrine. Some bishops refused to implement his initiatives, such as including women in decision-making roles or hosting interfaith dialogues aimed at fostering unity. Others accused him of straying too far from core Catholic teachings, particularly on issues like LGBTQ+ inclusion and environmental activism. Tensions occasionally boiled over into public disputes, with some clergy members openly criticizing the Pope in sermons or interviews. Yet, rather than silencing dissenters, Pope Robert encouraged open debate, believing that honest dialogue could lead to greater understanding. He frequently reminded critics that disagreement didn't mean disloyalty, it meant engagement. "If we cannot question ourselves," he once said during a private meeting with skeptical cardinals, "then how can we grow?" His willingness to embrace criticism while standing firm in his convictions endeared him to many, even as it frustrated others. Outside the church, Pope Robert's influence extended far beyond religious circles. World leaders sought his counsel on global issues, recognizing his moral authority and diplomatic skills. When negotiations faltered during peace talks in the Middle East, Pope Robert personally intervened, bringing warring parties together for frank discussions under the Vatican's neutral auspices. Though not every effort succeeded, his involvement often helped de-escalate tensions and pave the way for further dialogue. Similarly, his advocacy for climate action inspired governments and corporations to take bolder steps toward sustainability. A landmark agreement brokered by the Vatican led to significant reductions in carbon emissions, earning him praise from environmentalists worldwide. For younger generations, Pope Robert represented something rare in modern times: authenticity. At a time when trust in institutions was at an all-time low, he stood out as someone who genuinely cared, not because it was politically expedient, but because it was part of his DNA. Social media played a crucial role in amplifying his message, with videos of his speeches and interactions going viral. Memes depicting him as a superhero or a relatable figure, Pope Robert, the cool uncle of faith, flooded platforms like TikTok and Instagram. Even teenagers who had never set foot in a church found themselves drawn to his emphasis on kindness, empathy, and social responsibility. But perhaps the most profound impact of Pope Robert's papacy was its effect on the Catholic Church itself. Under his leadership, the institution began shedding its image as rigid and outdated, embracing instead a spirit of openness and adaptability. Attendance at Mass increased globally, especially among millennials and Gen Z, who appreciated his willingness to address contemporary issues head-on. Parishes reported higher participation in charitable activities, as congregants responded to his call to live out their faith through action. Online forums buzzed with discussions about how to apply his teachings to everyday life, creating a sense of community that transcended geographical boundaries. Even so, Pope Robert knew that lasting change required patience and perseverance. As he approached the second anniversary of his papacy, he acknowledged in a homily that the road ahead would be fraught with obstacles. "Transformation does not happen overnight," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. It is a journey, one that demands courage, humility, and above all, love. Let us continue walking this path together, trusting that God will guide our steps. Behind the scenes, Dr. Evelyn Leavitt maintained a quiet presence, watching events unfold with a mix of pride and reflection. Though she avoided discussing her role in Pope Robert's rise, sources close to her revealed that they remained in occasional contact, exchanging letters that touched on theology, history, and the complexities of leadership. While she never sought credit for her prediction, historians began referring to her interview as a turning point, a moment when the trajectory of the Catholic Church shifted irrevocably. Friends described her as humbled by the experience, grateful to have played even a small part in what many considered a divine plan. As years passed, Pope Robert's legacy only grew stronger. Scholars debated whether his papacy marked the beginning of a new era for the Church or simply a fleeting moment of reform. What no one could deny, however, was the profound impact he had made, not only on Catholics, but on humanity as a whole. By choosing to lead with humility, wisdom, and boundless compassion, he reminded the world of the power of faith to heal, unite, and transform. In the end, Pope Robert I's story was more than just the tale of an unlikely leader. It was a testament to the enduring belief that even in darkness light can emerge. Through his actions and words, he proved that true greatness lies not in titles or accolades, but in the ability to uplift others and inspire them to dream of a better tomorrow. And though the challenges facing the Church and the world remained immense, one thing was certain. Thanks to Pope Robert I, millions of people dared to hope again.